The preservation of multi-generational wealth is a dance between numbers and human connection. It starts with inclusion, bringing every family member into the financial fold. This is not just a spreadsheet exercise. It's a dialogue that bridges generations. Research shows that only 30% of families successfully pass on their wealth. Why? Because a well-crafted financial plan is not enough. You need a legal framework. Think estate planning and trusts to safeguard that wealth. But here's the kicker. The younger generation must be educated, not just handed a portfolio. They need to understand the mechanics of investments, the nuances of tax planning, and the importance of adhering to best practices. This isn't a one-and-done deal. It's an evolving strategy that requires regular audits and expert consultation. So as you build your legacy, keep this in mind. Wealth isn't just about what you leave behind, but how you prepare the next generation to handle it. Just a quick reminder to the panelists, you don't have to wait for me to call on you. Feel free to chime in at any time. But with that said, I do want to ask Heather, is it true that less than a third of families successfully pass on their wealth? Can you talk a little bit about family preparedness in legacy planning?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. And that family preparedness concept is right up our alley. There's a movement going on now called Wealth 3.0, which is really starting to question that original research that happened, saying that only a third of the families would be successful in passing on the wealth. And so there is some debate about that and some call for new research on that. What I will say is that family preparedness issue is such a critical issue, even more than what we might call family legacy. Family legacy is something that you want to pass across generations. Much of what, examples that were given, maybe it's property or wealth or philanthropy that you want to last across generations. But this family preparedness concept, meaning that the family is working together to get prepared as parents age. And how do we begin to do that logistically, tactically? How do we begin to think about what we want from this person to last across generations? And just to the spirit of what we're talking about, it's very often not the wealth that they want to last. It's more about those the human capital that they brought to the table, their values that they brought to the table, wanting families to prosper across generations from an education standpoint, for example. So really, really critical for all families, no matter what your wealth level, to get prepared in that way. And sometimes that's a really tactical exercise, much more than the philosophical. Sometimes it's just things like making sure all of your documents are in place, making sure that those estate documents have been crafted. But the big key here is that people don't often communicate within the family. So we spend a ton of time shaping the technical, growing the assets, putting the estate plans in place. And all of that is crucial to do. But families often forget about that human side of just sharing the plan, making sure that people are on board, talking about how we can support each other as we go through these life stages together. So I love that, Andy, that you brought up that concept of family preparedness, something that we do at Vanguard and are very focused on with our clients.
Caleb, you're working with advisors right now. To what extent do you involve like your teenagers, for example?
Yeah, I'm unpacking our family plan and trusts and wills right now. My parents, who are older, obviously, I'm dealing with that. And I am one of those people that's super transparent about it with my kids, about all things wealth, about all things money. I want them to understand it. In my family, even though I grew up, my dad's an investment banker, I grew up around a lot of business and around a lot of the conversations about money on a broader scale. Personal family finances were not something that we talked about. And we went through some things that caused me to be pretty risk averse, when I was growing up and starting to earn an income. So we talk about it all the time with my kids at the dinner table, not just what the plan is, but where does the money come from? What do things actually cost? What are our goals as a family? What does wealth actually mean to us? They have a pretty good idea of how much we make and how hard we work to make it, but also what is it for? What's the point of it? So it's a very open conversation with us, because I didn't have that growing up. And what did I end up getting? A lot of surprises and a lot of hard knocks in learning those lessons. So now, as the editor in chief, it's my job to talk about it to the world, but I make sure that I practice what I preach and bring it home to the kitchen table. And I think my kids are grateful for it. I think they have a better understanding of it. And I think it's a humbling, but also something that they understand is something they're going to keep learning their whole life. But I want them to have that good foundation and have a very good understanding of where we are as a family and where we intend to be.
It seems like money conversations are usually not that open, not only with our friends, but even within our own families at the dinner table. John, you talk about values. Like, how can families align their values when planning for multi-generational financial success?
Can I share a story related to that?
Absolutely.
I'm 9 years old, and I go to my dad and I said, Dad, I want to buy a baseball and a glove and a bat. He said, fantastic. I said, I need to earn some money. He said, well, have you mowed the yard? Yep. You edged the yard? Yep. You clipped the hedges? Yep. You swept the sidewalk in the garage? Yep. You done all the shale? Yep. You cleaned out the flower beds? Yep. You shined my shoes? Yep. He says, son, I don't have anything else to do. If you want to earn some money, you're going to have to go to people in the neighborhood and see what you can do to find something to be of service. So I went down the street and I knocked on a door, and then and Mrs. Evans said, yes, how can I help you? And I said, I'd like to know if I could take your yard. It needs some trimming and stuff. Can I do it? So I ended up working for that. And I spent the whole day getting bee stung and sunburn and blisters on my hand. And I did that whole yard because my dad taught me how to do a yard. I came back with some money, and he said, I see you bought your baseball glove and bat, and you earned some money. What'd you do? And I said, I've did this yard, and I did what you told me. Went to the neighbors and did it. He said, what equipment did you use? I said, the equipment in the garage. He said, son, I have to charge you for that. I said, what do you mean charge me for that? He said, yeah, you owe me $7.50. And I said, well, I've already spent it on my glove and bat. He said, well, that's not how it works in the world. You got to set aside the money for your cost of depreciation, and you got to go and pay some taxes and this and that. And that's not how it works. So I owed him money. I had to do a bunch of other yards to do it, and that cut down my profit. So one day a guy was coming along with a bicycle, and he saw me working in the yard, and I said, would you like to earn some money today? And he said, yeah. Well, in a short period of time, I had 9 people working for me when I was 9 years old, and had 3 teams going around doing all the yards. And I made about $45 after everybody was paid and everything else. My dad, I was doing pretty good. And I bought my bicycle and bought my golf clubs and all this stuff. And my dad said, well, now I notice you're not saving any money. I'm going to buy you a coin collection set. And you need to learn to save some of that, and a piggy bank to save it, which I still have in my office today, the original piggy bank from 1963 with the original coins in it. And I've never opened it up, because he never gave me a way of opening it up, to think long term. Then he said, now I got one more thing to teach you, young man. I said, yes, Dad. Every time he talked to me, it was costing me. He says, I want to teach you what it's like to be free. And I said, what's that? He says, I'm going to start charging you $7.50 a week to live at the house to cover clothing, food, and rent. And I was a little perturbed by that, but he made me reality. And what it did is I ended up paying for that. But he says, now you've got the freedom to go anywhere on your bicycle, go golfing anytime you want. You just need to be home by 9 o'clock. You can leave at 5 in the morning. You're going to be home at 9 o'clock. And he taught me how to be independent. He prepared me for multi-generational wealth by making me understand in reality what it's cost in the real world to do it. And so it's not just sitting down and intellectually talking with it. It's making sure that people have some sort of a work ethic and an understanding, because if they don't, they'll squander money, and rags to riches to rags is inevitable. So don't make it too easy on your kids. Educate them, but also make them accountable to be able to earn money so they actually understand it. Anytime you separate the purchase of something away from the payment of something, and separate in time and space the pleasures and pains of that, you actually put people in their amygdala and don't teach them how to actually manage money. They need to understand what the real cause and effect dynamics are right there on the spot, and extract out space and time in your mind from the pleasures and pains of buying and paying. And that way they're prepared in more reality about the real dynamics of fair exchange and building wealth. That education and real grounding education has a lasting effect.
I don't know about the other panelists, but I have 3 kids and I'm not realizing any revenue. I'm not doing things right.
You got to get an ROI on those kids. You know, I always say, by the time you're 2, what are you doing? You're laying there and suckling on a thing. Get to work. Said, you're a slave driver.
Daniele, any like historical lessons? Because there are so many like cautionary lessons about human nature throughout history, but I don't know what applies to wealth or money.
I mean, I think it's in some ways a bigger conversation, because as you brought up at the beginning that this is a conversation about wealth, but really the common thread in all of this is the conversation part, is the idea of communication. And the fact of the matter is that we often take communication for granted, but the reality is that when you look at people who are actually effective at communicating, it's not such a high percentage of the population. Like, I'm always blown away when I see problems that come up that could have been easily solved if everybody was on the same page and everybody understood each other's priorities, why something is getting done, coming to a decision that's a collective one where we all agree that at least is a decent compromise for everybody. Because otherwise, there's always this assumption that other people, it's almost the stereotype of the lady who wakes up one day and, hey, you didn't know that your husband was an axe murderer and you were married to the guy for 15 years. What happened? It's like, well, I don't know, never came up. We got along. He was nice to the kids and stuff. And it's like, a lot of the time, people don't really have meaningful conversations about what they value, what they care about, what they think and want for the future, what they think, about anything really. So the level of typical communication is so bland and superficial that inevitably you end up with the things where like there's a generational gap where kids feel that their parents don't understand and parents feel that their kids are spoiled and don't understand the values they grew up with. But whose fault is it? It's like you never really built a culture of communication, not in the family, let alone outside of it. And so to me, the whole discussion on wealth is a subset on the discussion of communication in general, of learning how to communicate effectively in a way where, if you're a leader in any business, or even if just part of a family, of any community, part of what makes somebody a good leader is knowing how to communicate with people, making sure that you understand how they feel about a decision that's made, making sure that you take their input into consideration, making sure that whatever compromise is agreed upon, they are actually really on board on it and not just because you raised your voice. And so in that sense, I really feel that it's like a whole separate level of education. First is there's going to be communicating about wealth, specific, but before you can communicate effectively about wealth, you need to communicate, period. And I see that whether looking around in my life right now or whether looking at historical example, I feel like the inability to communicate effectively is at the roots of a never-ending series of human problems and dramas that could have otherwise have easily been avoided.
Oh my gosh, yes, we see that in like geopolitical risk. And again, it's not just money not being addressed specifically enough in school. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't get communication classes specifically either. So let's move to segment 8.